My name is Sherzod Eraliev. I am a postdoctoral researcher at Aleksanteri Institute for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies at the University of Helsinki, Finland. My research mostly focuses on migration, parallel legal orders, shadow economy, and how migrants navigate the legal environment in the host societies.
So actually, my first question is for you, Sherzod. Can you talk a little bit more about who are Central Asian migrants? What type of jobs do they do? What's their profile actually?
Well, you clearly you briefly mentioned about the numbers of migrants, Central Asian migrants. As we know, there. Of course, I mean, all 5 countries have both migrants and, I mean, their migrant workers work abroad, but we know Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan as the largest suppliers of labor force in Central Asia. In terms of per capita population, Kyrgyz and Tajik migrants, they constitute the large percentage of the population. However, in absolute numbers, Uzbeks are leader as they are the largest supplier of labor migrant work because it hosts Uzbekistan is a home to like 34 million people, half of the total population of Central Asia. Almost half of the total population of Central Asia. And when we talk about Central Asian migrants, scholars usually portray them as young, low-educated males, mostly originating from rural areas in Central Asia. While this may be true, in general, we must not forget that this trend has, the migration has been very diverse, both in terms of gender, social status of the migrants, and why people migrate. But the general idea is that yes, usually it's the livelihood strategy for thousands of families to send their family members to work abroad. And we must also have in mind that there is also, for example, a growing number of education migrants. Thousands of young people from Central Asia study in Russian, Korean, Japanese, European, or Turkish universities who might be also involved in labor migration as students. And when we talk about migration from Kyrgyzstan, for example, it's more gender balanced. Kyrgyz migrants in Russia, for example, while Uzbek and Tajik migrants are male dominated, but this tendency is also changing in the recent years. On the other hand, in Turkey, for example, the majority of Central Asian, especially Uzbek migrants, are females. So I believe that the types of available jobs for migrants, like for example in Turkey, elderly care, domestic work, or garment industry, they necessitate such kind of gender diversification.
Maybe Sandra, you want to add something? You work specifically on migrants in Russia and their access to healthcare. What's their profile in Russia? Like, is it how to say? Like, is it more in cities? And can you explain a bit more about who they are there and what types of jobs do they do?
Sure.
Probleme, да, проблeme, негізілігі, да, проблeme, die Entwicklung.
Okay, I just muted. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sherzod, for this overview of the Central Asian migrants. I'm more deeply focusing on Russia. And what we can say is, as you said, and more specifically actually on a citizen from Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. In my survey, it's only focusing on Tajikistani and Uzbekistani. So what I say in general will be mostly concerning this population. So what is, so as you said, it's starting to be more feminized, but it's still very male in majority. For example, in our sample, we will have like 1/5 only of female about, and a little bit more from Uzbekistani than among Tajikistani. And so what you can say is that it's mostly in the huge cities where you find this huge flow of migration, but of course you can have somehow in other parts. But we focus on Moscow regions because it was impossible to do nationally representative surveys, so we focus on Moscow regions. And in this part, you can see that most of the working people are very concentrated in some sectors like construction, like care, for example, a lot of care workers among females specifically. Also gardiennage, I think it's like that in English. You can have also a lot of taxi, of course, because it's urban. So yeah, taxi driver, truck driver, also shop as well on the market, for example, that kind of typical typical sectors. You can also find a lot of, in our sample at least, mostly because it's Moscow and probably because it's a city center, you also have a lot of sanitary, how to say that, healthcare workers, for example, like nurse.
And all these migrants, like it's complicated for us to understand like what's their status, because in general they work in like in informal market. It's a bit hard to understand. Like, can you explain what's their status? Like, how do they come? Is it seasonal, for example?
Yeah, right. It's very diverse concerning this legal status. What I will say is our statistics, so this is not representative for the entire country, of course, but in general, it's mostly seasonal, as you said. No, I won't say seasonal. I would say temporary in the sense that only 5% of our sample get the permanent residence. So like the most secure legal status, you can say. It's only 5%. But it's also temporary in this. It's not completely temporary in the idea that it's repetitively temporary. What I mean is, like, even if it's seasonal, like for 6 or 9 months, very often they go back to the country. They will refresh their document. They will pay for another patent, for example. So the system of patent is a very important system it's a work permit that you get, that you purchase in Russia, and that gives you the right of working. That's why when you say most of them work informally, this is not completely right. It's more complicated than that. Most of them, like in our sample, for example, 60% of them actually get this work permit. They pay for it, but then half of them won't have any written contract. So that means it comes from the boss who didn't want to sign a contract, but they actually paid for the patent. So they're working formally somehow and informally due to the lack of written contract. So that's quite a complicated question.
Yeah, and actually how, Sherzod, maybe you can tell us, like, because of the situation, what happened with the pandemics when the borders were closed and when there were lockdowns?
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe I should add a couple of words to what just Sandra said about the being migrants being seasonal and the legality. I could say they are. This is mostly a circular migration when people go. I mean, they most of the time they stay in the host country, but still they keep their balance. They keep their going back and forth with the host country. And the Russian legislation also necessitates, even if you have a work contract, even if you have all the documents proper, after 1 year you have to get out of the country, leave the country, and return back to be legal. Which means, I mean, and according to this rule, I'm here talking about the mostly citizens of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, not members of the Eurasian Economic Union. So, of course, many of the migrants leave the country, stay for a while in their home country, and return back to resume their works. Not all of them do this, and thus easily become illegal or undocumented. And also, the official numbers of sold patents, the work permits are much higher than the Russian, for example, MVD officials give about the number of foreigners, which means there is a large number of undocumented people working in Russia, for example. When it comes to the pandemic, as we know, the number of COVID cases started to grow in March 2020, and Russia is closed its borders in mid-March. And around this time, at the same time, the Central Asian countries also introduced these mobility restrictions and shut down their borders, allowing only incoming citizens. So in Russia, since the level of restrictions differed from region to region, job losses happened among migrants also varied. Moscow, the largest destination for migrants in Russia, saw quite high incidence of job losses and layoffs. And job losses also for migrants also differed by sectors also. While those employed in the service and trade, like delivery, or construction, for example, they had to stay at home. Other people, some of the migrants could continue their jobs because they were deemed necessary, while others had to stay indoors without jobs.
And actually, we even covered that some of them switched jobs. So especially at the very beginnings, they would like switch and go to delivery because like the place where they were in construction, where they were working, shut down. So they found like ways to get a new income. But did it work? Like what were the risks for them, like economically and socially?
Of course, I mean, if we go back to exactly 1 year back, things were so unprecedented. I mean, not only for ordinary people like migrants, I mean, even scholars, experts, government officials, they did not exactly know what was going on and what would come next, right? And so people, I guess the migrant population in Russia, for example, there were very different groups of, there were many strategies for migrants. One was, I mean, if they lost jobs, let's say if shops was closed or a barber shop was closed, and it was, if an employer was employing like both Russian and Central Asian people, migrant people, so migrants were first in line for layoffs, right? And also Another group of migrants, although not in big numbers, those who immediately lost their jobs, they rushed to go back to their home countries through organized, but very in small numbers, those chartered flights. And as we remember these nasty pictures of people living in camps, makeshift camps across Russia-Kazakhstan border, trying to get home. But I mean, this is what we get the picture from media, right? In reality, imagine millions of migrants. So only, I would say, maybe 10 to 15% of people try to return. And the job losses and layoffs happened mostly half of March, mostly in April and May. From June on, things started to go back to normal, and by that time already people knew that there would be jobs, or if they could just wait, endure for a couple of months or for a couple of weeks, they could go back to their jobs.
Yeah, may I add something? Yeah, on this topic, I completely agree with you, Sherzod. And you have some an interesting survey that has been done from, I think, from internet. The respondents were responding on internet. It was from Vladimir Mukomel and Mikhail Denisov, I think. And they had this article. So they interviewed 500 migrants from Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, I think, if I remember. And they evaluate the jobless to approximately half of the respondents were jobless during the March from January, because it started a little before. So we don't have to forget that actually before the crisis starting, the COVID crisis starting, it was already some economic not a shutdown, but just a small decrease in economic activity due to the oil price variability. So that's another factor. And already in January, some of them lost their jobs. And then in April, exactly as you said, the peak was in April. Unemployment was about 60% in their sample, which is huge for people who are most of the time 100% working when they're in Russia.
Yeah, maybe we could add also about since a lot of Uzbek and Tajik migrants work in construction sector. From mid-March, these constructions was stopped, and then most of the workers, they were kept in dormitories, like right, with large numbers. And also the construction is a big business, and there is a big lobby behind it, right, in Russia. And they were lobbying for construction to resume its work. And in Moscow, for example, I think it was 18th of April that people were allowed to go back to work in construction sites, the largest employer of Uzbek and Tajik migrants.
So actually, it's interesting you mentioned these dormitories, because that's also where a lot of, they live in very small spaces. And that's also where there were a lot of clusters and cases of migrants getting sick. And it raises the questions of their access to healthcare, how vulnerable they are to like sanitary risk. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about that. Maybe Sandra, because you worked on this specifically on healthcare.
Yeah, sure. But once again, I have more materials about the situation before pandemics.
Sure.
So I can say what is very important first is to understand that this is a younger population subgroup. So in general, migrant population is in better health than the general population, which is very important to take in mind. And so among our sample, they are quite in good health. I have to notice that women are in less good health than men, but we will come back on this question, I think, later on about the gender difference. But just let's say that most of them arrive in very good health, in better health than comparable Russian, like same age, same population, same region. And their health is actually deteriorating after a while in Russia. So what we can see is a higher deterioration, by the way, for women, and depending on the status. So like precarious, vulnerable, as I said, the legal vulnerability is clearly a factor. And you can see that they arrive in good health, but then after a while, due to some working condition, they will deteriorate their health. And one of the important thing is the factors, the condition of living, as you said. So the most you share your room, we don't have so much people living in dormitory, because I think we did not reach the most vulnerable, like the most isolated one. We did not reach them. I don't think so. For example, the construction sites you talk about, Sherzod, that kind of people we didn't, especially because we reach only people who can speak Russian also, and mostly in the center of Moscow and in Moscow region. So it's a bit particular population, but even among this quite healthy population, like 20% said they need medical help at some point in the last months in Russia. And among them, more than 60% had already foregone care at some point. Like that means that 60% of the medical needs are not satisfied at all.
Mm.
Maybe I could add a couple of words to what just Sandra said. There are two things that we probably should have in mind. Of course, migrants need to buy these insurances, medical insurances.
Voluntary.
But they are nothing. Huh? I mean, in reality, they almost get nothing. But on the other hand, the COVID-19 infection was on the list of illnesses, treatment of which was free of charge, regardless of the nationality. I mean, be it foreigners. So migrants were entitled to medical treatment. And from what I have talked to, from what I know from the after the talks with people with migrant population, some of them did actually they were actually able to get medical attention from Russian health facilities. But at the same time, there are also reports that migrants, if COVID infection was detected in a dormitory, let's say with 500 people, the whole dormitory was shut down without allowing in or out no one. I mean, so not only they were not able to seek medical help, they were also in short of basic food. Yeah, so I mean, there were very different things, and we also know about the cases when human rights organizations or charity or volunteers or NGOs, they organized these temporary, if I may use this word, the hotlines, so they could call ambulances on behalf of the migrants who are not able to speak Russian or who were shy to speak to medical doctors. So this was very diverse, I should say.
And actually, like we are talking about healthcare, but again, it depends really on the country where they are. It's not only in Russia. and every situation is very diverse. That's what we get from this talk, and I guess that's what we'll get from this talk in general. What are the what is the situation now in terms of border closing? What is possible or not? Like how unemployed they are, or like in general, what's possible and what's not, basically?
If we talk about these three countries in Central Asia, citizens of Kyrgyzstan, as the country is a member of the Eurasian Economic Union, they were allowed to travel to Russia already in September 2020. So, I mean, they were the intensity of flights between Kyrgyzstan and Russia was not that high, but still, people who really wanted to travel to Russia for work, for example, they were able, which was not the case with Uzbek and Tajik citizens. Even students who were studying at Russian universities, they were not able to return to their education facilities. Only from the 1st of April this month, Uzbek and Tajik citizens were allowed to travel to Russia. Until that time, I mean, even now, people used different strategies to go, for example, to Russia. These were, for example, fake medical documents that necessitate the bear's medical treatment in Russian health facilities. We know several cases when migrants were caught with fake documents at Russian airports, and they were not allowed into the country and sent back right from the airport. Or the other option was flying to Minsk, Belarus, and trying to cross the Belarus-Russian borders illegally. I mean, this is not only illegal, but also dangerous. I think even today we had media coverage of like 22 people were, most of them Central Asian looking, caught on the Belarus-Russian border for trying to illegally cross the border. Or even there was also, I heard about this one option for males getting truck driving license, so that and then they could pay a truck driver who would employ him as his assistant, and then they would go together to Russia, and the person would stay there. But this is not also in large numbers, but people were attempting to do this.
And actually, you mentioned it fastly, but we didn't talk about it. But there's also another reason why they are very vulnerable, like Central Asian migrants, is because of xenophobia, especially in Russia. Can you tell us a bit more about it, and how did the pandemic change something with that, or actually it's not really the case?
Well, as a rule, we know that the search for a scapegoat in times of crisis is a very widespread phenomenon. It's in Europe, in North America, everywhere, and Russia is not an exception. Anti-migrant sentiments in Russia are based on fears that migrants take away jobs from local people, they abuse medical and social services that should serve only Russian people, and they disrespect this Russian culture. As the pandemic deepened economic crisis, especially in spring last year, more and more migrants started to see migrant workers as their competitors in the job market. And some media also started to paint migrants as potential criminals who are ready to do anything to find food. On the other hand, we should also mention that Russian Levada Center, for example, who conducts opinion polls on xenophobia, they announced their polls in September 2020, when things were more or less normal again. The results of these polls showed only a slight increase in xenophobia. I mean, I could not say there was a huge peak, a huge increase in of xenophobia towards Central Asian people. I don't know what Sandra has observed.
Well, it's really not in our scope, actually. So I will completely trust you. Yeah, I don't really know. I would say that, as you said, in general, during crisis, there is always a rise of all the xenophobic behavior. So probably, but I don't have it.
The notion that the notion that the Levada Center's results that, I mean, the rise in xenophobia was only slightly higher than previous years should not give us an opinion, should not give us an idea that xenophobia is low in Russia. It has always been high in Russia. So maybe that's the reason that we didn't see waves of going up and down.
And facing, yeah, please.
No, sorry, it was just a very little point, actually.
I wanted to talk about actually like facing all this problem, like this economic and social problem, xenophobia as well in general, like hard access to healthcare. We see that they develop coping strategies and that they find alternatives and safety nets. Can you explain us about all of this? Like how does it work? Maybe Sandra, you can tell us about how it is in the sample you studied, and how does it work, this solidarity actually between migrants?
Yeah, just to make the transition with what Sherzod just said, I would like to say that people think that services are supposed to be for Russian, as you said, and it's not supposed to serve the migrants. But actually, it's not even true, because the guaranteed package, like the universal access, is a very, very small package of care. And clearly, informal migrants doesn't reach it. They don't access it. So it's not even true. They can access like the care which is corresponding to a very life-threatening emergency, for example, like you said, COVID, for example. But that's all. No, they cannot have, if they are informal, they cannot have, no, not even if they are informal, or if they don't have the residence permit. So in this case, they are not entitled to any unplanned care access. Okay, so it's only for emergency. So this is the institutional obstacles, and as you said, there are some alternatives, some informal strategy to avoid that, and because they won't find enough social security, enough insurance, formal insurance, they will organize the solidarity among the community. So this is what we observed in RevPom. So what I'm talking about was mostly before the crisis, already for a while. For example, Juliette Clusiu started her research in 2017, and she observed this kind of solidarity network. So what she saw is a very organized communities. For example, there are very different types of solidarity network. You can have like some, how to say that, a charity collection of money, for example, a charity fund, which will be only created after an event, for example, the death of someone, of some compatriot or somehow, or for example, a surgery for children or something like that. And then you have more organized, more structured type of solidarity fund, which will be with, for example, regular contribution to the fund every month and every 6 months, etc. It could be among only a small network, like some friends working together from the same village, from the same community, or something like that. It could be larger. So we also observe some kind of it's almost, you can say, informal insurance fund, like provident insurance, in which you will have different stage with a contribution from different village, and someone will be at the head of this small fund, and then the fund will give to a higher level fund, which give to a higher level fund. So it's a kind of, could be village-based, could be city-based, could be region-based, could be nationally based. It's very different type of solidarity, could be very organized.
Mm-hmm.
It's working well.
Yeah, I think these solidarity networks really proved they proved to be resilient, in especially in the time of the pandemic, especially in spring last year. As we know, as a rule, migrants send almost all of their money, their earnings, to their families, and living for them only to cover minimal expenses. And those who lost their jobs, they had to borrow from other people who were still working. It seems so. We saw the sharp decline in remittances because it's probably the people were not sending home at that time. But I mean, one, they were keeping for themselves because of the uncertainty, and probably another reason is being lending to fellow countrymen. And that's what I saw. I mean, from distance again, in Russia. In Turkey, in addition to these phenomena, we respondents, our informants, also talked about how mosques have been the kind of center of delivering this kind of support to migrants in need. I can quote, for example, a migrant who's, I mean, he goes to a mosque where imam is asking people, if you have anyone from among your friends and among your acquaintances who need food, just ask them to come here, and then they were just delivering food. I mean, without asking about their identity documents or whether they congregate in that mosque or not. And also they saw it was not only the migrants themselves, also we should also acknowledge that local population was also involved in some charity works as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting how resilient migrant population are, and like how they find all these alternatives, and it's like they're very creative in finding ways to cope with hardships or with the pandemics here. I had actually a specific question. You mentioned it a bit earlier, but what's the difference between men and women in the experience of migration? Like, because they are very gender, like specialized work. So, for example, women would work more in care, or in Turkey they would work in textile, but men would be more in migration. But how's the experience differ? Are women more vulnerable, like vulnerability? Sorry, difference for both population?
I guess in general, female migrants are more vulnerable in many aspects, but specifically to this pandemic situation, it depended on the type of the jobs migrants were employed in. In Turkey, most of the female migrants are employed also in elderly care or domestic work, which means they live together with their employers, right? And I could say they were not the ones who suffered most. They had place to go, they had work, unless their employer would ask them to leave the job because they cannot afford any more domestic work. But that was not always the case. It's really difficult for me to, given this pandemic situation, to focus on whether it was male or female migrants who suffered more.
That's very interesting what you just said, Sherzod, because I think that, yeah, being a care worker could be a protection, could be a safety net, as you said, during that kind of crisis. Clearly, it could be also a bias of integration as well, of social integration, because if you have a good relationship, then they can help you in getting the document, for example. They can, you can have this good benefit from being in a house or working in a household. But I want to mention something which is before the pandemic, because still I don't really know, I cannot extrapolate and say who suffered the most. As you said, it's really complicated. But just to come back to the situation before 2020, what we noticed is that, for example, women are more vulnerable, as you said, in terms of deterioration in health. So we observed a higher deterioration in health among women. And one of the explanations was actually the longer hours they work. And most of the time, it's due to the lack of framework. For example, when you are working at home, you will work almost all day until night, and there is no real interruption of work. And for example, in our sample, I don't remember exactly the numbers, but women were significantly working longer hours all the week, and also they all work on Sunday more often than men. So you can see that it is definitely a kind of protections in some situation. It's also be one of the factors of deteriorating the more quickly the health. And that's probably the ambiguity of that kind of job, and probably depends on the boss as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit more complicated than who suffered more, because I guess there are so many different situations, and it's kind of hard to extrapolate, as you said. And actually, just to a last question before the Q&A, don't forget you can type them. You can type your questions in the chat, and we'll address them in a few minutes. About like how it's gonna be in the future, like in the sense that did the migration patterns evolve, or will they evolve? Maybe Sherzod, you can tell us a bit more about that.
Well, yeah, the pandemic has certainly disrupted migration processes in the post-Soviet space. However, we know from the experience of previous crises in Russia, be it 2008 and 7 or 2014 and 15, the migration, the data shows that migration from Central Asia is quite resilient. Of course, immediately after the crisis, it goes down, and then a couple of years later, we see again a rise. The numbers rise to the original or even higher. So I am sure that as the Russian economy will started to recover from the crisis, the number of migrants also increase in subsequent years. And another thing is that Russian economy, especially its labor-intensive sectors like construction, communal services, they have accustomed to use migrant labor, as it is cost-effective compared to hiring local population. The same can be said about Turkey and Kazakhstan, the two other large destination migrants. And another factor also increased unemployment and poverty in Central Asia. I mean, no matter how bad things are in Russia or Turkey or Kazakhstan, things are even worse in Central Asia, in the home countries of migrants. So this unemployment and poverty will remain as persistent push factors for many labor migrants in Central Asia.
Yeah, I agree with what Sherzod just said. It really depends on the situation of the host country, but definitely on the situation of the country of origin. And concerning Russia, more specifically, I have to mention the fact that Russia is, of course, a huge country of immigration, but it's also a huge country of emigration. So definitely, as long as Russia will have this lack of workforce, Russia will do everything, even with any xenophobic speech and so on. But they will definitely keep trying attracted all the Central Asian and other countries migrants. It is a tendency, and it won't stop like that. It won't stop just with COVID. I don't think so. And also because the birth rate is also quite low in Russia. It's a double factors of the willingness of attracting the migrants.
Yeah, there's this double movement, like Russia needs migrants, but migrants also need Russia, and like migrants at home and the societies at home also need migration. So it's
like a compromise. It's not optimal, but it's a compromise. As long as there is higher push factors from the country of origin and Russia and Turkey needs this workforce, it will be migration probably.
Yeah, not only push factors in Central Asia, but also pull factors in the destination countries are also important. So, I mean, we have this classical theory of push and pull factors in place in this situation.
Yeah, actually, in the recent survey I mentioned of Mukomel and Denis and Co, they said that they also interview people in Tajikistan, still in Tajikistan and in Uzbekistan, and most of them still believe that they will find a job. Even the migrants who were unemployed, they all say that they will stay and they know that they will get a job after recovery, and they are always very optimistic about the situation of economy in Russia. So, and very pessimistic about the situation in their own country. So it's a kind of compromise, yeah.
Thank you very much. That's the end of our discussion, and now we can start the discussion, enlarge it, let's say, with the public. Maybe, does anyone have questions for our guests? We see that there is a question from Oksana. What kind of difficulties did you have doing your research linked to COVID, I guess?
Well, if it's linked to COVID, we wanted to go, for example, I wanted to go to Russia, but last June, July, I mean, when we saw a decline in the number of infections, but I mean, the borders were still closed and we were not able to go there. And on the other hand, with my colleague Rustam Urimboy from Lund University, we were able to go to Turkey in late July, early August, and the difficulty, I don't think there were difficulties in terms of access to the field, to the informants in August, but when we went back in December, in early December, there were strict quarantine measures in place, lockdown was implemented, and it was the mobility in the city was quite difficult. Maybe that was, I mean, these mobility restrictions also apply to scholars, and it's good to do these online surveys but it's not all. I mean, we know not all migrants are. They don't always use either smartphones, or even if they use, they don't always have time to answer the surveys. I mean, that's a good strategy, but if you want to go deep to the level of migrants to see what's happening on the field with your own eyes, maybe that's another thing.
I see that the question was a bit more, but was in general related to conducting research. Maybe you can, you wanted to add something?
Well, in general, other than well, I guess all scholars have this problem. First of all, is I mean, getting funding to do your field work, to do your research in general, is the number one problem. But if you have this, and you have to balance and schedule your time so that, I mean, you have 1 week or maximum 2 to do your field work, go back and then come back another time, and this. Sometimes this, I mean, even a week, when you see the difficult lives of migrants, it could be too much. And while on the other hand, sometimes it's not enough to collect enough data. And it takes some time to build trust relationships with migrants who can readily share about their life stories, about their life experiences. So I could mention these.
Yeah, if I can add something about that. In our team, we are 2 economists, 2 anthropologists, and 2 sociologists in RefCom project. And we also had to cancel like 4 fieldworks, I think. So it was very immobilized for a while. Definitely, it was a problem. And in terms of other difficulty, we did not have so much difficulty. No, I mean, no, not as much as I was scared about, but maybe some methodology was a bit tricky sometimes, especially from converting like all the observation of the anthropologist about the solidarity network, solidarity fund. That was very difficult for us to translate it into a questionnaire. And then after we did that, it was even more difficult to explain the surveyor. Do you say it's surveyor? The conductor of the survey, who were Russian for most of them, to explain them why this question was important and why and how to ask it and so on, because for them it was just a nonsense. They never heard about that. They thought we are talking about charity funds at the exit of a shop for orphans, or that type of solidarity fund. That they really, there were a huge gap between this community of survey conductor and the community they will have to survey. So we had to explain a little bit, and it was mostly barriers, that kind of barriers of training barriers actually.
Yeah, because in general they live kind of like it's how to say, not separate from the Russian society, like from Russians, ethnic Russians, I would say, but it's not really worlds that communicate, and like Russians know very little about how Central Asian migrant lives like just next to them, right?
But those conductor, they were they were very they were very conscious of everything. They knew a lot about migrants from Central Asia. That was not like completely naive and
yeah, I meant more about the society.
They just didn't know how solidarity funds work, and they didn't know the detail, but they were not completely separated from the community now.
We have a question from Elena. Did you see the increase in people wanting to get Russian citizenship during the pandemic? Can you first explain how does it work for the citizenship? Like who can get it and is it complicated?
If you're asking me, yes. First of all, the number of Central Asian people getting Russian citizenship has been increasing in the last 5 years. I mean, I don't have the exact numbers in my mind now, but for example, there is a sharp increase in people getting Russian citizenship among people from Tajikistan. So in order to get Russian citizenship, it's almost the same with other countries. You get this first temporary residence permit, RVP, and then you get this permanent residence, and then after several years, you with other several requirements, you qualify to obtain Russian citizenship. About this increase during to wanting to get Russian citizenship during the pandemic, we should see it in the coming year. Of course, I think my speculation would be that more and more people, especially Uzbeks and Tajiks, they now became assured that having Russian citizenship makes things much easier. I mean, they knew this for years, but at the same time, the pandemic showed how important it was to have this document. And I guess now we should see in the coming 2 years, if we see a steep increase, that means that, I mean, this has really, in the coming several years, I should say, that means that a pandemic has necessitated the importance of getting Russian citizenship.
And how do they, like, on what condition can they do it actually?
Well, as a rule, you must live several years, or if you want to have fast-track Russian citizenship, you must prove that you have, how do they call it? They have this compatriots program. If you are a part of if you speak Russian as your main language, and if you have these cultural ties to Russian and the people who live on the Russian territory, and this is one of the rules, that one of the requirements if you want to get fast track citizenship. Otherwise, you first get this temporary residence. You must pay. You must be able to financially sustain yourself to get those documents, and you must not have a record of administrative offenses. I mean, you must be clear, and you must be a potentially good citizen, and you must prove that you are a good person.
I see. Sandra, can you tell us a bit more about repatriation of bodies? Maybe actually only before pandemics, because I guess during pandemics it was a bit different and that's not on your sample, unless you can tell about that. But how does it work when you die abroad, like as a migrant?
Yeah, thank you for this question, because it's actually a big part of the project, of RevPom project. So what I can say that, so as we mentioned before, the Solidarity Fund, for example, we only talk about the health emergency and so on, but one of the first use is actually for repatriation of the dead body. So it's really huge, because so in Russia, for everyone, not only for migrants, burial costs are really high. So you have all this sector is very unregulated. It's very corrupted. It's very expensive. So you will have to pay for the burial ceremony, of course. You will have to pay, if you want the imam service, for example, you will have to pay a lot of money in the mosque. Then you will have to pay probably some bribes at some point in the mortuary services. You will have to bargain to get back the body sometimes. It's really high. It's really tough to manage this kind of situation. And what happened is that also because there are very few Muslim slots in the cemetery in Russia, and because because of all these costs, actually the most of the migrants and even the permanent residents will prefer to repatriate the body in the country of origin. All the tradition, values factors, all the religious factors, and so on, and the willingness to send back the body to the country of origin. But also there is this huge financial factor. For example, it's just an approximation, but burying a body in Russia is about 60,000 rubles, which is about like $700. Compared to repatriated the body in Tajikistan, for example, is about 25,000 rubles, which means half of the price. You can remember this is approximately half of the price, but still it's very expensive. It's $300. It's still very expensive for this subgroup of the population. So that's how they will. That in that case they will organize a kind of charity fund, or they will mobilize the solidarity fund if they already contribute to one. They will mobilize the network in general. And so that was already the situation before the pandemics. During the pandemics, there was this problem of the borders. So it was closed, and they were not it was not at the beginning. Then the states did something, I think, but at some point it was very difficult to send back a body to the country. So there were alternative strategy. For example, some of them were buried in the countryside for free, like in very cheaper spaces than in the Moscow center cemeteries. There were some other strategies like that.
Well, to add a couple of words on the matter, I'm not an expert on this, but what I know from the media, from my conversation with officials of Uzbekistan, and from what media is saying, the repatriation of bodies of Uzbek migrants, it was almost the same problem with Tajik migrants. But since 2019, the government of Uzbekistan is covering all the costs. At least they say they cover, and I know several cases personally that they cover the transportation costs. Maybe there are individual cases where people were not able to reach the authorities, or there were other technical reasons. But it seems generally the government is paying for the repatriation, and I think the Uzbek media also reported that like several dozen people were repatriated, several dozen bodies were repatriated with since the pandemic started, with those chartered flights.
Yeah, Tajik Air is also paying for the transportation of the body. Not all of them, but you can also use that that way. But still, there is not only the transportation. There are other costs that even informal costs. So
of course,
the government cannot pay for that.
Yeah.
Do we have another question? And if not, I have a question, but. Because we didn't mention it, but from like my interviews with migrants and families of migrants, that's what I felt, and we didn't really talk about that. But about how important it is that as a social phenomenon in the home countries, like how it is viewed for this migrant to go there and to be kind of not almost as on a mission, like, you know, to provide for the family. Can you explain a bit more about that, like about how important it is, not only economically but also like what's the symbol behind that?
Well, scholars have several scholars have written on this topic. I just recall, for example, Madeleine Larouet or Sergei Abashin, how migration has become not only an economic strategy, an option to live, overcome economic obstacles, but also migration has become a way of life for many people. It has become a social phenomenon. And in, for example, if you go to the Fergana Valley, a very densely populated area with very few job opportunities, with high incidence of unemployment. Migration is like, I mean, if you remember, I mean, those people who remember the Soviet period, social, how to say the word, to become, to intend, to become a member of the club of manhood, for example. You go to the army, the Soviet army institution. I mean, you become there, socialized. You get this. I'm still trying to remember the word. Anyways,
the passage in French.
Yes, that's yes.
I don't know in English.
Rite of passage. Yeah. So for many migrants, for especially young people, migration has become this kind of rite of passage for many people. When you have to face those challenges posed by migration, and the difficulties, how you overcome them, that make you man. And then there are some villages in Uzbekistan where, I mean, not being in migration or not having a job is considered to be something extraordinary. I mean, you are considered either lazy or you must have a very serious reason not to be in migration. This is not about whole of Uzbekistan or whole of Central Asia, but mostly about the rural areas with very few job opportunities. So, and people, for example, why people migrate? Huh? Why they are engaged in labor migration? They may have to finance their wedding or build a house or paying the tuitions of their children, and then so they go 1 year, 2 years, they fulfill this, and there is another son who needs to home person you need to marry, or a brother or sister. So there is always a reason to migrate. I mean, at least from migrants' perspective, there is always something else that you need to collect money for, and then after that you stop it, and then this temporariness becomes permanent. So you are perpetuated in the circle of migration, and people can, in many cases, people cannot stop unless there is a serious another job. I know a migrant, for example, who has worked 15 years in Moscow as a driver. He, as an Uzbek from an Uzbek mahala, he has accomplished all his duties, like married his children. All of them have their houses. Everyone is fine, seemingly fine. But then he comes back to Uzbekistan. He buys next year a car. He tries to work a little bit as a taxi, but I mean, not because he needs a lot of money, but I mean, you know, money is what you need every day. And then he becomes bored, and then he chooses Turkey as an alternative destination for migration. And then when you ask him why do you keep, I mean, why don't you sit in Chaykhana, for example, with your friends, and then you talk every day with your friends who are sitting every other day or every weekend in Chaykhana, they're enjoying. So the person cannot find an answer. I mean, he has every reason, he has many reasons to give you why he is involved in migration, but he still, I mean, you understand that this has become a way of life for many migrants. Sorry if I have talked too much on this.
No, that's very interesting, and actually I'm curious about something you mentioned, like that we see that more and more migrants go to Turkey. Like why is Turkey like kind of starting to be the next destination for migrant workers from Central Asia?
Yeah, I guess the first reason is, if you remember, in 2013 and 14, Russia introduced these draconian laws in order to fight this illegal migration, and more people started to get entry bans from 3 to 5 to 10 years. So those migrants, and of course, a lot of them, they stayed in Russia. They didn't leave Russia. Actually, they just waited for this time to be over and then go back and then come with a new passport. And those who were living in Russia, they were not able to go back. So Turkey became an alternative for destination in this regard. Another reason why Turkey is becoming a popular destination is the Turkey. We know, I mean, Turkey tacitly accepts this informal employment of migrants. They need cheap labor, and they want to make Istanbul as a hub for shuttle trade, for tourism, for everything, and then a lot of cheap labor is needed there. And also for political reasons, Turkey is implementing these visa-free policies with many countries, including Central Asia, and people who are involved in, for example, in shuttle trade, next time they go, they may find a temporary job, and then that's how. And then there is this snowball sampling that, I mean, if you hear that someone is working there, especially women, they find job, and another one can follow from the same village. Or another reason for Uzbekistan, for example, since it's I believe it's the fastest growing migrant group among Central Asians in Turkey. It's also the opening up of the country. I mean, Turkey and Uzbekistan had very bad, I mean, not very good relationships in the past, and this has changed. A lot of Turkish businesses returning to Uzbekistan, and a lot of migrants are also going to Turkey as well.
Yeah, and actually we didn't mention it, but there's an obvious reason that the language is similar.
Of course, the language is similar. Yes, and religion is similar, and I could cite a couple of people who are saying that after this noisy Moscow and one was saying that every time I hear this azan, the call to prayer, I mean, and it's like everywhere in Istanbul, you can hear from every corner, and this gives me a lot of excitement there, and that's the reason I think I want to stay in Turkey, even if the salary is comparably less than in Turkey.
We have one more question. How does migration from Central Asia to Russia contribute to international transnational studies? What makes the situation of Central Asian migration in Russia unique?
That's a very large question. I'm not a specialist of global policies, so I'm not sure about the answer. But in my from my point of view, what I can say is that at least what Sherzod mentioned before, actually, maybe Russia is one of the biggest host country. It's like it used to be the second in the world after US, and now it's like the fourth. But still in the model of like theoretical model of migration, it's more like immigration model with a permanent installation of the migrant in the new huge like OECD country based on the US, based on Canada. So, and I think this particular model of migration from Central Asia to Russia, which is typically circular migration, like repeated seasonal, repeated temporary migration, is probably not only in Russia, it's clearly happening in Europe as well. And it's starting to maybe to change. It's revealing this different pattern of the migration, and not like a one-way arrival in a new country, and you set up and you stay all your life and you get the citizenship, of like this kind of very classical pattern, which is obviously not at all the majority in the world. And I think the fact that there is this huge other migration space is also making this theoretical model evolving. I can say that.
Maybe I could mention here. Some people scholars have already written about transnationalism in Central Asia, or transnationalism of migrants, Central Asian migrants in Russia. To mention a few, Abashin or Orimboyev, for example, Orimboyev, he discusses how Mahalla is an Uzbek or Tajik neighborhood where with very strict social norms, and where you have these kinship relations, and how these social norms or reciprocity is translated or played in Russia while migrants in Russia, or how the relationship between migrants in Moscow, let's say, and on the other hand, in an Uzbek village back in Uzbekistan, how these relationships, how, for example, dynamics of relationships between migrants in Moscow, they influence relationship between families of those migrants in the village, back at home, or I mean, let's say a migrant who is not behaving very well, rumors immediately reach the home country, the home mahalla village, and then how they come back again, I mean, from the family members of this, and this social control is also played in destination countries also. And what else? I think I wanted to mention something else as well. I believe Oksana already knows about those works, and also the role of ICTs, with the availability of internet and communication technologies. Migrants are living both in their host countries and then in the host societies. They are all in constant change. Even myself and even migrants, people, they know more about their home country than their host country. I mean, and they are very much involved and embedded in social relations even if they are physically in a host country, they are still involved and they play a certain role in their home countries, and vice versa. I mean, parents can play also, or family members can also play their roles in the host society.
Thank you very much, Oksana, for your question. It's very interesting. I think we'll have to close on that. Amelia, you wanted to say a few words, but I think she has a small internet problem. Yeah, she has a small internet problem. That's what I saw. So thank you very much, everyone, for being with us tonight. And we hopefully will see you another time at the next conference for Novastan. Goodbye, everyone. Good evening. Maybe Sherzod, you can stay for a few seconds.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.